Welcome to the Optum Rx Pharmacy Insights Podcast. In this forum, we'll discuss the latest and most impactful events in pharmacy benefit management. Today's episode will focus on the year ahead in pharmacy and what plan sponsors can expect throughout 2024. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Kamprath, Vice President, Trend Insight and Analytics for Optum Rx, as well as Bill Dreitlein, Senior Director, Drug Pipeline and Surveillance at Optum Rx. I want to thank both of our guests for joining me today. Before we jump in, can each of you give us a little bit about your background and your responsibilities here at Optum Rx? Michelle, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really happy to be here, Scott. Thank you for inviting me. I've been with Optum Rx for coming up on 16 years now in a few different roles. And in my role today, I lead the Trend Insights and Analytics team here at Optum Rx. And we have a really fun job. We get to analyze historical drug trend and spend to help everybody understand what's driving trend and why. And then we also work to formulate projections about future trends, what we think is going to happen later on. And this helps my team inform the business about what's going on in drug trend, along with what we think is going to happen. And that helps us drive strategies to better understand and mitigate future drug trend.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Bill, can you tell us a little bit about your background and responsibilities at Optum Rx?
Yeah. Hello, Scott. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here. So a little bit about me. I'm a pharmacist, and I oversee a team that does what is commonly called horizon scanning. And what that means is we look at the new developments that could impact our business and our clients. And one of those areas is pipeline, new brand drugs, new generics, new biosimilars, things of that nature. So I've been here at Optum Rx about 5 years. Actually, just yesterday was my 5-year anniversary. But before coming to Optum, I had a bit of a journey to get here. I started out as a hospital pharmacist. Was in academia for 5 years and then made the leap to the managed care world, where I worked for a large PBM in the clinical affairs group, doing clinical training and working with the P&T committee, the trend report, pharmacogenomics, a whole lot of different things. And that's kind of a little bit about me. I like to dabble in a lot of different things. I spent some time also after that as a medical director at an advertising agency that did work with pharmaceutical companies. Spent a little time at a publications company before finally landing at ICER. I was at the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review for a few years. I was employee number 13 there, which was kind of fun. And I was their only pharmacist. So it was a lot of fun there. And that's really where I started to get more deeply into the pipeline, trying to understand what drugs are coming, what drugs could be potentially impactful. And that led me to Optum Rx, where I picked up that same theme of looking at the pipeline, trying to pull out the items I think could be heavy hitters for us, and understanding and analyzing those a little bit more. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Well, thank you, Bill, and congratulations on your anniversary at Optum Rx.
Yeah, I get to choose from a little list of gifts. I'm not sure whether I should pick earbuds or something for the garden.
Well, looking forward to learning what you picked on the next podcast. Michelle, why don't we go ahead and get started with you? Really like to set a baseline. Can you give us a sense of where we are right now in terms of both specialty and traditional drug trend?
Yes, of course. So right now, we're at a very interesting time with drug trend. I've been looking at pharmacy trends in different roles in this company for over 15 years, and we've been talking for this whole time about growth in specialty. We've been telling clients specialty is going to reach over 50% of your pharmacy spend by X year. And for some clients, that already happened a while ago. But when we look across our entire commercial book of business, 2023 was the first year where we actually did see specialty surpass traditional in drug spend. But at the same time that happened, a class in the traditional space called GLP-1s that everybody's talking about, and I know we're going to get more into that in just a minute, it really started to take off last year. So shortly after specialty trends surpassed traditional, the GLP-1s caused the traditional trend to really start to pick up. And now, not only did traditional flip back to account for more than half of the spend, but for the first time, at least since I've been tracking trend, traditional trend is higher than specialty trend.
Michelle, one of the big developments we saw in 2023 were the arrivals of this slate of biosimilar drugs in the inflammatory drug class. So these are drugs that treat conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease. Michelle, what does the data tell us now that we have these new alternatives to branded products like Humira?
Right. So the first biosimilar for Humira launched at the beginning of last year. So we're kind of at this 1 year mark of the biosimilars for Humira. And I think as we stand here today, there are 10 approved biosimilars. So a lot of biosimilars to Humira. And there's more in the pipeline too. And this is a moment that we've been waiting for like a decade. Humira has been the reigning queen of worldwide pharmaceutical sales for like 9 years. And it took a global pandemic for the COVID-19 vaccines to surpass Humira in worldwide sales in 2021. That was the first drug that had surpassed Humira in 9 years. And now that we have 10 biosimilars with more on the horizon, so even though Humira today, it still has the lion's share of the market between it and its biosimilars. That doesn't mean the biosimilars aren't doing their job in bringing the cost down. The biosimilars came out, they created competition in the market, which we all know drives down prices. And we've seen the net cost of Humira come down by over 20% since they started coming out. So in the end, competition is good. We're looking forward to more biosimilars entering the market this year. And some of them are going to include more interchangeable options and a high concentration biosimilar. And those are two things that just don't exist yet in the market today. So it's still an exciting time for biosimilars and more to come.
The other big trend we saw come to the forefront recently is the increased utilization of these GLP-1 drugs. Michelle, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. These were medications that were initially approved to treat type 2 diabetes, but later received approval for the treatment of weight loss. Michelle, as you are well aware, utilization and cost of these medications is among the top concerns for a significant amount of our plan sponsors. Based on your analysis of the data, what should plan sponsors consider as they approach this class of drugs?
Right. So you mentioned it well. When you talk about GLP-1s, you have to separate the ones that are approved for diabetes, which most of the plans cover today. Um, they're pretty commonly used. And then you have the ones used for obesity, which have historically been more of a choice for plan sponsor. So I think the biggest question that some of our plan sponsors are struggling with right now is whether or not to cover them, period. And for those who already do cover them, it's how can we continue to afford them because they're just driving costs, driving trend up so much. But at the same time, the plan sponsors are getting pressure from their members to cover them. And some employers are even finding that coverage for these drugs is a benefit that can help retain their workforce. Like the members, the employees see it as a benefit that they have to have. The problem is at what cost should they cover them. These drugs, as they stand today, are just priced too high. Here in the US, we pay 10 times more than what they cost in Western Europe for the same drug. And we also know that only about a third of patients who start on the drugs are still taking them after a year. So plan sponsors are smart. They know this, they see the data, and they're starting to think more creatively. They're thinking, okay, I can pay $1,000 a month for one person to take this drug, or is there another way I can spend that $1,000 a month to help my members lose weight and get healthy? So plan sponsors are just in a really tough spot right now. They have to manage their plan to a budget. And I'm not saying these are bad drugs. I'm not saying they don't work, but I can confidently say, based on both our internal analyses as well as a very reputable external source, ICER, where Bill just mentioned that he came from, that these drugs are not cost effective at their current price today.
Yeah, Scott, I'd like to kind of pick up that thread a little bit if I can. I think we're in a really interesting spot and it may be an uncomfortable spot right now with these drugs because there's a natural tension between two very important components of the business of healthcare. One is the clinical aspect of do these drugs work, and the GLP-1s clearly have a benefit on lowering A1C very potently for diabetes, and then they help with weight loss, better than anything we've ever seen before. But at the same time, there's also that natural tension with the cost of the treatment, and how do we manage that so that the people who need the medication can get it, to get the benefit, but also ensure that those who take it long enough to realize the benefits of it. As Michelle had mentioned, it's adherence and persistence with these drugs is very, very difficult. So it sets up a lot of tension amongst different elements here that we're still sorting out. It's still taking us some time to figure that out, and I think we will. But it's just a kind of an uncomfortable time right now, and I think that's I think the audience probably is feeling that. So we recognize that, and we're trying to find solutions to help along the way.
Bill, those are some interesting points. It is obviously a very dynamic class. You look where we are today compared to just 2 years ago, right? The market is just totally different. Today we have Wegovy and Zepbound as the two GLP-1 products approved for weight loss. How do you see this class evolving over the next several years?
Yeah, I think we're at the beginning of this. The evolution, I think, will come in probably three forms or three waves, is how I'm thinking about it. One is the expansion into new indications, where we've got semaglutide and tirzepatide. They're both approved for diabetes and weight loss, and they're both looking to increase their footprint a bit into areas that are connected to both of those disease states. So let's take, for example, semaglutide is being studied for chronic kidney disease. It's relatively common in patients with diabetes. And, if you treat the diabetes with a GLP-1 like semaglutide, does that have beneficial effects on chronic kidney disease? It might. And we're looking for that data, sometime this year. And that will give us a little bit of more information about the true impact of these drugs beyond just lowering A1C, a marker of diabetes, and lowering weight loss. Another example is sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a common condition. It's commonly associated with being overweight. We know that there's cardiovascular implications of that condition. And so there's additional data coming forward this year with tirzepatide to see if that drug can help with sleep apnea. So those are two examples of how expansion into new indications or new areas that are related to how their drugs are used today, could take place. The second wave is in new mechanisms of actions. We have multiple drugs in the pipeline that are looking to build on kind of the backbone of semaglutide and tirzepatide, and targeting GLP-1 and GIP, and adding on some additional components to either boost the efficacy or increase safety. So two examples are retatrutide. It's a triple incretin agonist, so it targets glucagon, it targets GLP-1, it targets GIP, and so by adding on that extra action of targeting glucagon, there may be actually more potent weight loss. So the early signs are that it does seem to be associated with pretty impressive weight loss, maybe a little bit more than what we see with the existing treatments, but we'll have to wait and see if the side effect profile is any better. And then there's another drug called CagriSema. It takes semaglutide and then adds in another drug called cagrilinotide, which is an amylin analog, and that extra mechanism, also enhances potentially efficacy in diabetes and obesity. It's still early with both of these drugs, but the initial findings from phase 2 trials is encouraging, and we're hoping to get more solid data probably next year. And I'm eager to see whether the tolerability is better with these agents. And then the third area is, one of the things with the GLP-1 drugs and the dual GIP GLP-1 drugs is that they affect such a really broad range of organ systems. And so as we learn about these drugs for diabetes, obesity, and then these tangential conditions, I think we're going to continue to learn more about their use in other diseases. So there's great interest in using these drugs for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, very common condition called NASH. And what NASH means is it's fatty liver. There's a buildup of fat in the liver that leads to fibrosis and damage to the liver. Down the line, it could lead to liver transplants. And so if you can attack that disease at its source, then maybe you can have a beneficial effect on the downstream effects of liver failure, liver transplant, et cetera. There's also a lot of interest in using the drug in Alzheimer's disease because there's some activity in the brain. That activity in the brain, we know it increases a sense of fullness, and that's how it works for weight loss. But there may be other actions in the brain that could help with Alzheimer's disease. And that would be a whole new area for these drugs to be used. Still early days in both of these disease states, but the impact could be fairly large. So those are the things that we're looking for from a pipeline perspective.
Bill, it's absolutely fascinating how much development's going on, but also how easily some of those terms just flow off your tongue. You definitely have it down to a science.
Well, it is there. It's interesting how much activity there is in this space. So from a pipeline perspective, up until now, there's really been very few, manufacturers involved. But looking at the pipeline, and it's really grown a lot. And every manufacturer is trying to get into the game, either with molecules or that they have in-house, or acquiring somebody that has some molecule in that particular space. It's a really dynamic space right now, and because of the broad mechanisms, they're looking at it in all sorts of areas. So some of those just will not pan out. That's just the nature of pipeline. A lot of those things just will never work out, but some of them will, and some of them may be surprising. So we watch for that, and if we see the signals, then we look at it a little more deeply and try to understand what the potential impact might be, and then plan accordingly. But it's certainly an exciting time for sure. You talked about pendulum swinging back and forth. The pendulum, is definitely swung in that direction right now, very heavily. So we'll see if it continues to swing or if it comes back.
Right, a lot more to come in that area.
Yeah.
Well, before we move off of GLP-1s, Scott, I'm going to hijack your podcast for a minute, because Scott and Bill, I took the liberty of coming up with a few GLP-1 trivia questions for you since we're so focused on these drugs. So I've got 5 questions. I'm going to ask a question, and whoever answers first correctly gets a point. And then whoever has the most points at the end gets a really cool prize. So are you guys ready?
This feels like it's weighted heavily towards Bill, but let's give it a go.
I don't know. We'll see.
I'll wait and see how you feel about that after the first question. So question number 1. Which celebrity has not shared that they are on a weight loss GLP? Is it Oprah, Jessica Simpson, Elon Musk, or Tracy Morgan?
I'm going to guess Tracy Morgan.
Okay. Bill, do you have a guess?
That's what I was going to say too.
Okay. Unfortunately, you're both incorrect. The real response is Jessica Simpson. She has vehemently said that she is not on a GLP-1 for weight loss, but all the other ones have. All right, so 0 points for the first one. Number 2.
Bill, I don't know if we should feel good or bad.
I don't know.
All right, you ready? This one's going to take you back to your SAT days. Zepbound is to Mounjaro, as Wegovy is to what?
Ozempic.
Yes, I think I heard Bill first. So Bill, I'm going to give you a point for that one. All right, question number 3. Whoever's closest to this one, because you're probably not going to hit it on the head, whoever's closest will get a point. So in what year was the first GLP-1 approved?
2012.
Bill?
First year of a GLP-1?
In what year was the first one approved?
See, I'm going to go back to Byetta. I think that was a GLP-1. And so I'm going to say that's like a 2000, 2005.
Oh my goodness, Bill. Not only did you get the drug right, but you actually got the year right. That's impressive.
Wow. All right. See, I remember. See, I actually reviewed that drug one time. So,
All right. So question number 4. What country besides the USA is the only country that can advertise GLP-1s direct to consumers?
I'm going to say Australia.
Scott?
I honestly have no idea.
Scott, I'll give you a hint since you're behind. He was really close geographically, but that wasn't right.
How about New Zealand?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Got it. So New Zealand is the only country besides the US where it's legal to advertise drugs direct to consumers. No other country can do that. All right, Scott's coming back. It's 2-1 Bill right now. Question number 5. And this is another one where whoever's closest gets the point. According to a recent KFF health tracking poll, what percentage of adults say they would generally be interested in taking a safe and effective prescription weight loss drug?
I'll say 60%.
We doing like Price is Right rules? Closest without going over?
Goes 0.
I said whoever's closest, but don't make me get my calculator out.
So I'm going to say 70%.
70%? Oh, Scott got it right. It was 45%.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it would have been higher too, but no. You would think so by the utilization that we've seen on GLP-1s, but not so much. All right, tiebreaker.
Hey,
You
Bill,
ready?
before this last question, no pressure, but if you get this wrong, you're going to be the one who's hosting this podcast, and I'm going to be the one being interviewed. So, no pressure here, though.
Okay.
You gave away the prize, Scott.
That'd be fun interviewing you, actually.
All right. For this one's a tough one. For which one of these diseases are GLPs contraindicated? History of appendicitis, concomitant use of warfarin, medullary thyroid carcinoma, or patients who are insulin resistant?
Medullary thyroid carcinoma.
I think Bill's right, I think, on that one.
Yeah. Yep, Bill, Scott, you got it right behind him, but I'm going to give it to Bill because you answered more quickly. So, Bill, your prize. I downloaded you your very own GLP-1 copay savings card.
Cool.
And yeah, it's pretty exclusive. Not everyone has access to the internet,
Congratulations, Bill.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you.
That was great, Michelle. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to
Bill,
thank the Academy. I'd like to thank the Academy for this award.
So, Bill, we certainly spent a lot of time on GLP-1s. As you look, specifically in 2024, I'm going to ask you broader here in a second, but specifically in 2024, what FDA approval decisions are you expecting this year?
Yeah, there's just picking up on the trend theme that we talked about earlier. I think just before I get into that, I think there's an interesting dynamic at play there. The past 4 years, we have seen that rare disease products outnumbered non-rare disease products for the past 4 years in a row, actually. So where orphan drugs for these really rare conditions have outnumbered the more traditional mainstream products. So that's kind of really been an interesting swing that the development pipeline has swung in that direction. But the ones that I'm watching, are not in that rare disease realm, but really more and more mainstream type of conditions with larger populations. So the three products that I'm looking at this year that I think could be interesting and impactful, they're in different areas, but the first one is resmetirom for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Non-alcoholic steatohepatitis is a very common condition. It leads to liver fibrosis and possibly transplant. And this could be the first drug ever approved for that particular indication. It's an oral product, so it's very convenient, and it seems to have some data that supports it where other drugs have failed. So I'm looking forward to that one. We could see that one in March. The second one that I'm watching is a drug called ensifentrine. It's an anti-inflammatory, but it's not a steroid, and it's used for COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So COPD is an area we really haven't seen a whole lot of development in recent history. So this is a new mechanism for this particular condition. It's given via nebulizer. So it's not like a meter dose inhaler where you take a few puffs. It's really given by a nebulizer. So it's probably going to be used more in people who have severe disease. But it's interesting in that it's the first new mechanism that we've seen in a long time in this disease space. And if it works there, then certainly we could eventually see it expand into other areas like asthma. So I think that one's interesting. That one could be coming mid-year, possibly in June. And then the final one that I'll highlight, because I like to think in threes. The last one I'd like to highlight is called CAR-XT. CAR-XT is a combination of two drugs, and it's used for schizophrenia. The first is a drug that gets into the brain, and it works on the symptoms of schizophrenia. But the problem with that one chemical is that it causes too much toxicity in the rest of the body. So what the company did was they paired it with a drug that doesn't get into the brain, and it counters all of those side effects. So it enables the drug to be used in high enough doses where you can actually get benefit from the product. So it's a totally different mechanism than the existing treatments that we have for schizophrenia. And importantly, it's not associated with the same degree of weight gain. It's one of the huge problems in with atypical antipsychotics, which are typically used for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and others, where they work, but they also result in it just changes the metabolic patterns of the body, and people put on a lot of weight. And it's not necessarily a function of eating. It's just how they metabolize, and they put on a tremendous amount of weight. It's a really real problem. And this could maybe avoid that. So it's an area, in mental health where I think there's been a great need, and this could, number one, provide an effective therapy where maybe others, might not work, but also it could be more tolerable as well. So I think it's a pretty interesting thing. So for those three, one, is for more of a metabolic condition. The second one is more for a pulmonary lung condition, and then the third for mental health. So those would be the three that I'm really looking at, for this year. And then just if I throw one in for long term, there was an actual publication today of some news that I think is very interesting. So anybody looking, further ahead, there's a drug called VX548, which is a new pain reliever. But the interesting thing about that drug is that it does not work on the opioid receptor, and it's not a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like ibuprofen. And so it seems to be better than placebo, not quite as good as an opioid, but there's been a great need for new pain relievers that are non-opioids because of the addiction crisis we have here in America. So that drug probably won't, if all goes well, it wouldn't be until 2025 that we might see it. But it's an important one to, I think, track. I think you're going to see continued attention, enthusiasm around that product. So you heard it first here on your podcast, Scott.
Thank you, Bill. Michelle, really last question for you, kind of in a similar vein. Are there any trends specifically that you think plan sponsors need to pay close attention to as we progress through 2024?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind with that. If Bill thinks in threes, I think in twos. But the first one that comes to mind is drug shortages. And the second one is reformulations. So, first on drug shortages, there have been drug shortages in several classes, including GLP-1s, by the way. But one of the areas where it's affecting plan sponsors from a trend perspective is in ADHD, sorry. Shortages of generic Adderall and more recently generic Vyvanse mean that patients may not have the choice to even fill a generic when they go to the pharmacy counter, even though there's one that's approved. So it's really preventing the full effect of the generic savings to be realized by the plan, at least until these shortages are resolved. And then a second trend that we've been seeing for a while that's going to continue is drug spend shifting from the medical benefit to the pharmacy benefit. And to be fair, we sometimes see a shift from the pharmacy to the medical benefit, but that really hasn't been the overarching trend that we've observed. And this is happening in several different classes. So, for example, over the past several years, we've seen this general shift in oncology. More and more cancer treatments have been approved as oral formulations. So, it's good, it makes it easier for patients to take them. It also means that the prescription likely processed and paid under the pharmacy benefit. And more recently, we've seen it in specialty asthma. There's a handful of drugs for asthma that used to be administered in a provider's office. And then they were reformulated as self injectables. And now people are filling them at the pharmacy counter. So we've seen the trend in specialty asthma go up. And there were a couple of reformulations that were approved late last year in the inflammatory class. So we might see some of those shifting over to the pharmacy benefit. And it's also happening in the rare disease space. There were 2 newer oral formulations to treat ALS. And this type of shift isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to be aware of because specialty spend is increasing. It might be partly a shift rather than just an increase in utilization or cost. So those are the things that we're kind of seeing this year as far as overall trend.
The reformulation one is that's a really big area of the pipeline. Surprisingly, that there's a lot of activity in that space, looking at products and trying to reformulate them in new ways to take advantage of the delivery mechanisms we have today and make them better. And so sometimes you see that shift from the medical to the pharmacy, and if you're managing the pharmacy benefit but not the medical, all of a sudden, boom, you might see this drug appear on your radar and be like, whoa, where'd this come from? Because it was one of these reformulations. So it's a big area.
Michelle and Bill, really appreciate your time and expertise today. Bill, I think we all look forward to following you on the game show circuit as we move forward here in 2024. So thanks again.
Thanks, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Draeger. Tune in again for more discussions as we examine the most important issues in pharmacy care services.